The Crown of Zoroastrianism, which is chapter 8 from book 2, The Parsis, of The Treasure of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism by James Hope Moulton. Think not that I will accuse you. Okay, that's not it. We put in an earlier chapter a problem to which we promised to return, and it is fundamental. In the extreme case of the penitent robber on Calvary, we heard the dying Christ challenge the whole principle on which Zarathustra's system depends. Well, no, we really didn't. The doctrine of the weighing of every man's merits and demerits before the bridge makes forgiveness of sin impossible. No, it doesn't. The sinner who repents can only begin to accumulate merit as best he can. His salvation depends on the opportunities he may get for making up the balance. It is quite easy to make a very plausible case for this, and the crucified brigand's winning a paradise can be easily set down as a cheapening of heaven. And yet, Zarathustra himself supplies the hint of the answer which Christianity returns with full assurance of faith. Is not a man's self, dana, his system of judgment, really. And that's sort of what Buddhism means by no self, isn't it? Which is to be his ultimate reward or retribution. If the determining factor should be the ultimate condition of that self, when the thoughts, words, and deeds of a lifetime have come to harvest in an hour, it is quite false to assume that man, whose case we have taken as typical, suddenly reversed the whole past in an hour, in the very agonies of death. Well, see, why can't God forgive, or you become a new person? Apocryphal legends are symbolically true when they invent past episodes in the brigand's life in which he played a good and his impenitent fellow a sufferer, an evil part. No man whose whole life has been vile could have risen in an instant into nobility. Actually, that's a common train of religion, period. But other people paying the price for it. Yeah, that's common too, but not religion itself. The priestcraft has put that one way or another. The chain of cause and effect on which the East meditates continually was not broken in this or in any other case. The last decision for good, even though deferred till the hour of doom was all but striking, was the resultant of forces that had been acting through a lifetime. Now the teaching of Jesus is centered on this very truth which Zarathustra divined in his new conception of the dana that makes heaven or hell. If only he could have afforded to sacrifice the inherited doctrines of the weighing of merits and demerits, he might have made far more of his great idea, for the two are really incongruous when we pursue them to their logical issue, and the weighing, superficially sound though it be, soon brings our whole conception of a last judgment, of a perfect justice upon individual lives, into a hopeless tangle. Now, remember that Daniel is at least 3,500 years ago, because it was already put into a different sort of legend where you would expect that a prophet wouldn't quite be in some of those details, but, prophet of God anyways. But Dean in the Arabic, it's the same conception. And the al at the end means belonging to God. But the self or soul developing under divine influence for the unimagined possibilities of the boundless future is the center of the thought of Jesus, and we may claim that Zarathustra caught something of the transcendence of that thought. Perhaps he would never have allowed the other line to cross it, had not the inherited idea of the weighing of merits and demerits appeared to promise a fruitful solution for the problem of the winning of the victory for good in the world as a whole. The thought of the cultivation of the self to take its appointed place in the universal development of creation seems to supply an answer so far as our limited powers can take us into the mystery, to the questions that are so insistently asked both in East and West. Men are perplexed by the inequality of service and reward, short toil, eternal rest, a few years of good life rewarded by an eternity of bliss. Is this divine justice? Is it not more in accord with right that the merit should be exhausted in time, and the soul should come back into earthly life, no doubt trailing clouds of glory from the heaven which has been its home, to win a renewal, a longer lease this time? To this we may now reply that the analogy of nature, since the new impulse given to our knowledge by Charles Darwin, has taught us of an upward movement everywhere, every species having before it the unconscious aim, as it were, of developing into something more advanced. It accords with the whole scheme of the world as we see it, to believe that this supreme purpose of the cosmic process is the perfecting of individual beings in relation to their immediate environment and to the universe. It should be remembered that Yaotan and Sukhan are interchanged in the same great saying. Luke 9:25 uses the former, Mark 8:36, and Matthew 16:26 the latter. Sometimes things were said more than once, but sometimes the Bible has literally several different, actually 8 in one instance, options that only one could be true or none of them could be true. This is far more worthy, surely, of a great world mind than the conception of God as a preeminently a judge, ever busy dispensing strict justice to his creatures. We cannot exclude that conception from our thoughts of him, and indeed the ultimate to many problems that we are forced to give up is couched in terms of it. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? But the very analogy of human life teaches us not to regard this as the chief element in the picture we form of deity. The vast majority of us never enter a law court. It stands behind us as a safeguard for our rights when assailed, and it is a pillar of the fabric of society. But weigh the word judge or even king against the word father or mother, and we see at once how impossible is any comparison. Must not the function of God as the universal parent, concerned supremely with the perfecting of his family and every member in it, take its place as incomparably as the highest and truest of which our minds can conceive? If that is true, and the ultimate purpose of God is attained by the perfecting of every man as a free agent for the work of ministering to the social organism in which he finds himself, we may dismiss the idea of merit as establishing a claim on God for reward. Good thoughts, words, and deeds are not so many golden coins, the accumulation of which will enable us to purchase a mansion with the blessed. They are the fruits of a tree that has been carefully planted, watered, grafted, pruned, that it may become the very best that the gardener's patience and skill can raise. And that is a far inference from Zarathustra's teaching of the Dana. Well, then the Dana is not quite your spirit or soul. It's what you've done with the mind and body. Nay more, it survives in that gem of the ladder of Vesta, which pictures the Dana as coming on the wings of a fragrant south wind to meet the good man's soul, and to reveal that her fairness has grown with every good thought, word and deed of his life. May not the Orthodox Zoroastrian, Kanon Zardosht, regard that as the pivot of his founder's teaching? Remember, Zarathustra did not want to be considered a founder of religion, and Muhammad and various others before and after also abhorred the thought of being thought as a founder of a religion. And take the weighing as a parable, which conveys profound, important, but not primary truth. It would answer fairly to the forensic metaphor by which Paul strove to make clear one aspect of the atonement. The overstraining of the metaphor has done harm to Christian theology, quite comparable with the harm done to Zoroastrianism by the stress laid on the principle of the weighing. We may take this inquiry a little further to bring out the light Christianity throws on the mystery, on the confines of which we are timidly moving. The most illuminating passage in the teaching of Jesus on this subject is his parable of the pounds. It compares this life, the activity of slaves set by their absent master, to petty shopkeeping on a capital of some 50 rupees. One makes his 50 into 500, a second into 250. A third thinks the task impossible, and does not believe it possible to please his exacting master. He guards his capital carefully, and brings it back intact but unimproved. On the master's return, the slaves find to their amazement that he cared nothing for the money. He lets the 2 diligent slaves keep theirs, and adds to the treasure of the first the money the lazy slave had returned. He was testing them all the time for the task of ruling cities. The man who brought 10 coins for the one entrusted to him suddenly rises from the position of a slave to that of a ruler of 10 cities. His less successful comrade gets 5, and the third, who refused his opportunity through idleness and distrust of his master, remains a slave still. When we look at Dashapurar Aja, in his new splendor, we get a vision of the immensity of life in the hereafter. God is training us in the trivial round and testing us for vast responsibilities. They constitute a reward, of course, but that is not their chief feature. The king's government has to be carried on, and he deigns to need our service therein. He who provides his devotion and capacity in the small sphere of life will be promoted to unthinkably greater responsibility in the great world, of which we can form none but the vaguest conception. But many of our sorest perplexities are solved by this new view. If our earthly life is only a testing and a training, we need not wonder why there are so many premature withdrawals of bright and promising lives. God does not need the time we need to test a character, nor does he take our view of the importance of a post to which he has set us. Only he can know whether service here or service yonder is better for any individual for the supreme interest of his kingdom. Okay, Luke 19:11 through 27. Is that the one that talks about killing those who don't take Jesus as Lord, or is that the other thing? Parable of the pounds. We may go further and point out, I'm not advocating killing people because of any sort of belief or disbelief. We may go further and point out that when once the radically false idea of merit and reward has been eliminated from our picture of God's dealings with us in the hereafter, what all the prophets came from is that the good will see it, the bad will see it, the consciousness or the right belief or the wrong belief, And the thought of punishment for the past merged in the higher ideal of a divine working out of what is best for the community and the individual. Well, they can be combined, thank you very much. We have a very wide range, a possibility left for the solution of questions which the East insistently urges, the essential evil of its own favorite solution, which so many Parsis are adopting, with or without attempt to square it with their scriptures does not lie in Punarjanma itself. Popular Christian thought, and even that of deeper inquiry, has ignored too much the conceivable implications of the word sleep in the New Testament outline. Those who were laid to rest through Jesus, 1 Thessalonians 4:17, were not merely left to the kindly ministry of nature's sweet restorer to recover energy for new work after life's fitful fever. In a world where time is not, in a sleep where God's healing processes may have unlimited scope without delaying the conscious fruition of that great reunion for which so many of us are living in hope, God may set the soul in new environments to further its training on the sides where it is weakest. That there must be further training is obvious enough. The soul, at best, leaves this life only partially trained, and we cannot expect to know yet where God will find the environments that each one needs. But we may learn from our knowledge of his dealings with us here of a central fact of his eternal task, of which the Christians consider him to be a father, but again, a mother in this world can do some things, and that, the overstating of gender roles has created a lot of issues of his creatures. See, if they're creations, they're not parent, you're not a parent. He is before all things busying himself with the higher stages of an endless development, which began countless ages ago in the protoplasm and will end in nothing short of the fullness of the stature of Christ. Well, if this guy knows Greek, then he knows that Christos goes a lot further than one figure, and that there's a whole series of figures in the Bible that would be called Christ. Some of them aren't even human. But before we fall into the error of thinking that God is male, every male or female, they all have strengths and weaknesses of various mental and physical ways over each other. Equal overall, but if you're going to say that God's a male or a female, or even both, you're putting human limits on things. It's your own psychological issues. The destructive heresy is to dream that God can ever be vindictive in punishment, or can allow blessings to be extorted from him by merit. What, those who have attained a good consciousness, that doesn't, no, that's not destructive, that's constructive. When we have done our utmost, we've only done what was our duty. When once such fatal misapprehensions are gone, we may leave reverent speculation to picture the possibilities so far as may be found helpful, only provided that we do not waste in guessing an explanation of the world the energies which are needed for redeeming it. One thing, however, is plain, and on that we cannot exercise our thought too strenuously. Indian religious speculation has launched into deep mysteries of the way in which the grace of God acts on us. Christianity welcomes and extends indefinitely all efforts to realize more clearly the manifold and infinite operations of that grace, which sets itself to find an avenue of approach to every human heart. We picture perfect knowledge as aiming at the Achilles heel of the sinner who has made himself all but invulnerable against the gracious wounds of eternal love. Somewhere in the complex nature of every man, there is a place where good may get its footing. It is the supreme task of our humanity to find it in our most hopeless fellow men. We draw out our bow at a venture, and sometimes it is guided by a wisdom that is not ours to the joints of the harness through which it may reach the heart. God never needs to search thus blindly. He knew, to return our former typical example, where was the spot in that dying robber's heart that could be reached by sovereign grace in its mightiest working, even though the man's whole past may have been irredeemably vile to all human seeming, and that wonderful new tide of understanding flooded a soul that was just winging its way into the unseen. It found itself in paradise. So did Adam in the primeval story. May this paradise also have been lost after all, our warrant for hope lies in the word with me. Whatever befell the infant believer there, put to sleep through Jesus, his deliverer, and that sleep by ways we cannot know healed of his sin and started on an upward calling, we may be confident that the Good Shepherd knew how to guide that hardly rescued sheep into a fold of peace in the end. Now, what do we see about the rest of the messenger prophets and exemplar prophets and such? And let's not forget that when we look at that saying, we are looking at something that the Bible does not say Jesus said.